Disclaimer: I'm an English graduate and we are trained to analyze and overanalyze and make far-reaching connections. You have been warned. Anyways, I'm back with another Powerpuff Girls video because this show is so fun to analyze, and not because these are the only videos that seem to be performing well on my channel. Haha, would you look at that? But seriously guys, please watch my other videos too, they're really entertaining. So today I'm going to talk about the racial and ethnic representations in Powerpuff Girls and whether Powerpuff Girls could possibly be endorsing some dangerous racial stereotypes.
Hey! Do you follow me on the Slack? Follow me!
The idea for this topic came from this thought that I had. It was Mojo Jojo's skin color. It's green and Mojo possesses this distinct accent that tells you he's definitely not American.
Dear Powerpuff Girls, I have kidnapped Professor Utonium. He's with me, but not by choice. I took him and he didn't like it.
Now, his skin color in particular reminded me of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. You know Frankenstein, where you had this monster?
Maniac, Frankenstein, brought a maniac.
That was birthed by this mad scientist. A lot of people seem to think that Frankenstein is the name of the monster, but no, it was actually the scientist's name. It was notably remarked in the novel that the monster had long black hair and yellow skin. Mary Shelley at the time had been reading Blumenbach, who was a German anthropologist who categorized the human species into 5 races, and yellow was the color he used to denote Asian race. And a lot of times in the novel, the monster was remarked as not being European. So he was an outsider, he was different, possibly Asian, and he was outside the understanding of European people, and so a monster. This then led me to think whether Mojo and maybe all the other villains of the Powerpuff Girls could also possibly represent ethnic minorities, and could the show be projecting some stereotypes? So here I come with this video. Let's first begin with the representation of our perfect little girls, Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. Something that always bothered me about Powerpuff Girls was the emphasis on the perfect in the perfect little girls. All these 3 girls are white, especially Bubbles, who's the epitome of the Nordic Aryan race with her blonde hair and blue eyes. The other 2 also have white features and they're all Caucasian. The only exception being Buttercup's black hair. And if you look at the series, you would see that Buttercup got the most flack out of the other 2. She was the one who was most susceptible to turning evil, as seen in the episode Pace Makes Waste, where she bullied this kid, and Moral Decay, where she beat the heck out of villains who had not even committed a crime.
Buttercup's teeth may be fine, but her attitude sure is rotten.
So the perfect little girl is a white girl, and she has to be this overachiever who's a combination of all that is sugar, spice, and everything nice. This obsession that Professor Utonium had with his perfect little girls is actually a direct parallel to Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein was an interventionary scientist who wanted to create the perfect creation. A creation that will outlive all others, a creation that will outpower all, and most importantly, a creation that can be born without the need of a woman. And Professor Utonium seemed to have a similar vision. However, the difference between the Powerpuff Girls and Frankenstein is, in the former, the girls are these idealized superheroes, but in the latter, the creation was labeled a monster and was ostracized and shunned. A warning that Mary Shelley had possibly tried to give the viewers was that when you go against nature, as Victor Frankenstein did by not including women in the process of reproduction. So when you go against nature and try to become God, as the gift of life is God's prerogative, you birth monsters. However, Professor Utonium was successful with his perfect little girls, thus effectively sending the message that life can go on without women. This then makes you wonder if Powerpuff Girls is really a feminist text after all. Now let's get to the inspiration of this video. Mojo Jojo. He's an evil scientist that devises evil schemes to take over Townsville and destroy the Powerpuff Girls. He used to be a normal ape that used to serve as the professor's assistant before the girls' inception, and I don't know, would this come under animal abuse? Mojo was caught in the blast of the chemical X that conceived the girls and went through mutation. His skin color changed to green, his brain got oversized, the top part of his skull went missing, and he could speak, albeit with a very heavy accent. Now, there's actually a very interesting parallel between Mojo and Frankenstein. When Victor Frankenstein birthed his creation, it was not what he expected. The creation had yellow skin tone, similar to Mojo's green, whose ethnicity, as we established, was possibly Asian. So the creation was yellow skin toned, it was gigantic, and Victor was terror-stricken by the creation's eyes. The monster was not born evil. All he longed for was acceptance, but his own father, Victor Frankenstein, rejected him and labeled him a monster as soon as he was born. Society cast him aside, branding him an outcast because of his grotesque appearance, and he was never met with kindness but fear and judgment. In their scorn, people created the very monster they feared. And it's the same with Mojo. The professor shunned his existence as soon as the girls were born, and his own father, as I said, rejected him. Mojo too earned a grotesque appearance after the blast, and I won't be surprised if he too was ostracized by the townspeople, thus quote-unquote making him a monster.
No, please. I dare not listen. For I have been lashed by harsh tongues for too long. Alas, my little ones, I, Jojo, am a monster.
Now let's look at Mojo's attire. Mojo wears a turban that is a very cultural and religious symbol of the Sikh community that's a South Asian ethnicity. And his skin color green could also symbolize that he's from an ethnic minority. And a lot of people on the internet seem to think that Mojo represents black people. Historically, one of the factors that justified and sanctioned colonialism and racism over the global South by the white people was scientific racism, such as social Darwinism. Social Darwinism draws from Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and survival of the fittest. The more evolved you are, the fitter you are to exist and rule. You are then destined to dominate those below you. It justified creating a social hierarchy, and since black people, quote-unquote, resemble apes in the great chain of being, they're considered less evolved, less able to function rationally, who need the control of a white master to tame them. During the years of slavery in America, black people were devoid of the most important tool that would lead to their emancipation: education. If they were unenlightened and unaware of their basic human rights, slavery would perpetuate easily. The whites had this irrational fear that if blacks became socially empowered, informed, and enlightened, they would then subjugate white people and make them the slaves instead. The whites used to project their own tendencies on the blacks, and what do we see in the Powerpuff Girls? Mojo, who's an ape, gets this oversized brain and this transformation into a genius scientist. And what he deems to do next? He deems to subjugate Townsville and become a sort of a colonial master.
I, Mojo Jojo, shall be king!
The show here is proving white people's inhibitions right by saying, look what happens when you grant education to the blacks. And this is not to say that I hate white people. Oh my gosh, no. I have this American friend that I love till death, and I'm so grateful to have her in my life. Casey girl, it's a shout out to you. Next I'm going to talk about is a group of people that only appears once in season 1. The Boogieman and his posse that appeared in episode 6, Boogie Frights. The episode begins with nighttime falling over Townsville and the Powerpuff Girls getting ready to go to bed. Buttercup tells her sisters the story of the Boogieman, a child's worst nightmare, and instills a fear in them. Buttercup at this moment essentially embeds the fear of the other in her sisters, them versus this other that is unknown. Mind you, the Boogeyman was only fearful in her stories because he was unknown, something they didn't understand, and he was different from them. After the girls go to bed, we hear some crazy beat.
Say, do you hear something?
And like some hint of a disco music, and then the audience is transported to some underground club where we see all these multicolored creatures partying. Now, this is a very clear representation of the disco culture in the United States. The disco era's origin could be pointed around 1965 and was a cultural movement of music, dance, style, and fashion, comprising artists that were African Americans, Latinos, and gays. The disco culture rose to prominence so much so that DJs became a star in their own right, such as Larry Levan, along with disco music producers such as Giorgio Moroder. However, by 1980s, disco music started to fade in popularity because it was seen as stagnant with the same repeated formula, however, also because of racism. In 1979, Chicago radio disc jockey Steve Dahl hosted a disco demolition night in Comiskey Baseball Park. He put fire to a large pile of thousands of vinyl, which consisted mainly of disco music, but other genres too, such as rock and jazz by artists of color.
July 12th.
This event was culturally and socially so terrorizing that it resulted in the club culture shift to underground safe spaces. So, associating disco culture that was pioneered by ethnic minorities that had been ostracized and marginalized throughout history, associating them with freaks and nightmares that are supposed to be the villains of that episode, yep, not the best idea. So the Boogeyman and his posse, they are creatures of the night who would perish in sunlight. In order to combat sunlight so they can continue to party endlessly, the Boogeyman releases a disco ball into the space that eclipses the sun, raining nightfall over Townsville forever.
Oh my god! Townsville's been turned into a nightmare nightclub!
So then, what do the Powerpuff Girls do next? They thrash and smash that disco ball, kind of like Steve Dahl, who detonated that large pile of records. And once they do that, the narrator says this.
Oh yes! The sun is free to shine on Townsville again!
All the freaks and nightmares perish into thin air, and Townsville's status quo is restored. The status quo where ethnic minorities are unwelcomed. The show also gave us trans representations through the character Him, on which I made an entire video, so please go watch that video and please subscribe and bye!